Hi everyone, and welcome to the second part of a five-part series with Acronis, NEBRC, and Framwellgate School. Today we've got Martin and Wendy who will introduce themselves in a second. We're going to be covering how cyber criminals were foiled after stealing school data and making demands for payments, and really getting into the detail of a recent attack that Framwellgate had. You are welcome to ask questions, put them into the Q&A. I mean, if we do have time, we'll cover them today. If not, we'll follow up directly with you afterwards. So, Martin, would you like to just do a quick introduction, please?
Yeah, so I'm Martin Wilson. I'm a serving police detective inspector based in the northeast of England, and part of the NEBRC, which is how I know Acronis, who are a key partner of ours. And obviously, I got to know Wendy, who will introduce herself shortly, because prior to September, Wendy and I didn't know each other when they had the cyber incident. Since then, we've become best friends.
I've noticed. Wendy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, thanks, Ed. Morning, my name is Wendy Pattison. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Framwellgate School, Durham. And as Martin said, rightly so, we met back in September when Framwellgate School, Durham suffered quite a major cyber incident.
Thank you, Wendy. Right, Martin, I will hand over to your good self and Wendy, and I'll fade into the background. Thank you.
Excellent. So just a little bit about the NEBRC. The NEBRC is a cyber resilience centre. So when you look at the map of England and Wales, you'll see that there are different logos, and we cover from borders of Scotland, Berwick-upon-Tweed, down to Humberside. But there are different cyber resilience centres across England and Wales. The key point of this slide is I just want whoever is on the webinar to know, no matter where you are, this isn't a postcode lottery. There is help. And what the CRCs are is they're collaborations between policing, academia and the private sector. So clearly you've got me, a Durham police officer, working with Acronis from the private sector, working with academia and students. And all of this will become really clear as we progress through the case study today. But fundamentally, we come together to help small businesses be prepared and respond to and recover from cyber attacks. Next slide, please. So a couple of things on this slide. It is very busy. Its main purpose is twofold. I want you to notice across the top of the screen, there's a timeline with a green segment. You'll see that green segment moving left to right as we progress through the slide. So these are dates of September and October of last year. And the icons are all logos of all the different agencies that came together at Framwellgate School's Durham time of need. And I think it just is a testament to that partnership that we're building within the cyber resilience centres and policing in general to try and combat the threat. Next slide, please. So we'll start off with Wendy, and I'll jump in to demystify what a protect notice is. But Wendy, take us back to the 16th and 17th of September, please.
No problem. So back in September, my network manager went off on holiday on the Friday evening. And over the weekend, some of my colleagues, random colleagues in school, started to get phone calls quite late at night on the Saturday night and during the Sunday. Most of the colleagues ignored the phone. Few answered it. And it seemed to be somebody purporting to say that you are under attack cyber-wise at your school. They thought nothing of it. They thought it was spam because obviously nobody was connecting up the fact that more than one person was getting these calls. So on the Monday morning when I came into work, I received an urgent phone call, which I took in the main school office so that I had witnesses to that phone call. And it was somebody, again, purporting to be from the National Crime Agency saying, your school is currently under attack. It's a cyber attack and I need to speak to you urgently. When I dug down into that call, it still sounded to me like spam because the lady I spoke to changed the story. So it went from you are under attack to you are at risk of attack. So there was just a few anomalies in what was said. So I challenged that. And the lady said to me, do me a favour, contact Durham Constabulary. They will collaborate my story. We've been trying to contact them over the weekend. So that's what I did. Durham Constabulary said, yeah, we've been contacted by the NCA and I can confirm that this is legitimate. So you need to get back onto the NCA, which we did. And then what became evident was, and as Martin says, he'll go into more detail about the Protect Notice, but we received a Protect Notice to say that some of our data from Framwellgate School Durham had been found on the dark web. They couldn't give us anything more than a tiny snippet of it. They wouldn't say whether there was more. They wouldn't say, what it, if you could have expanded it, what it would have looked like. It was literally just somebody's name who used to work here and their email address. So I don't know if Martin, if you want to explain more about what that Protect Notice is all about.
Yeah, so the sort of difficulty that policing's had, so you've got colleagues in the National Crime Agency, this is a weekend, that may have intelligence. So policing always gets intelligence. So as an example, in the sort of analog world, we might have what we call a covert human intelligence source. So someone that might be part of an organised crime group, a drug gang that's feeding police information. Obviously, we protect that source for obvious reasons, risk to them. And obviously, if the source is ever outed, not only is the risk to them, it means our sources of intelligence and information dry up. So I'm not privy to what exactly the intelligence was on this case, but colleagues in the NCA had found something which was indicative that Durham Framwellgate School may have had or having an ongoing breach of the network, or something with the network might not be right. So ultimately, because it's the weekend, they're probably just looking at through maybe all police crime reports to try and see what contact telephone numbers they may have of staff, and they're desperately trying to sort of contact staff, which is why it probably seemed a little bit unprofessional, if you like, but that's just the nature of, time is essence. But so, yeah, that's probably why it seemed a little bit not genuine to Wendy, but ultimately she did the right thing by challenging it, because how do you know that it's not a scammer? But ultimately, I think what gave Wendy some reassurance is not only does she have her own network manager, she also has some secondary IT support from an IT firm in the northeast of England. And because we had sort of policing has better connectivity for that IT firm, because that IT firm has many businesses, we were able to deliver the intelligence via them, which gave it some more credibility. Next slide, please. So anything you see on a slide now that has green writing refers to a decision that's made. And we'll cover this as we go through. But ultimately, the intelligence was, we've seen an LDAP, bit of information on the dark web, and that basically encompassed the name and email address of the previous school network manager. No further details, no further information. So Wendy, do you want to touch on what your considerations were at this time? Because I know at this point in time we've not met, so I guess it's a nice segue into what you did with that information and how you come to speak to the NEBRC.
Yeah, so as I say, my network manager was on holiday for that week, which was excellent timing. So One ITSS were in the background. They were brilliant. They were able to get straight into our network and help us have a look at things. In relation to the Protect Notice and the data that was there, that was an immediate, is this a data breach? Is this a data breach? And after consideration, we contacted our data protection team, which is a service level agreement with Northumberland County Council, who also were absolutely spot on. They were excellent, and they and I agreed that at the minute it wasn't yet a data breach, because the NCA couldn't give us more information because of the sensitivity of it. They couldn't tell us the extent, and all we knew was one bit of information that got out there, which was that person's name and that person's email address, information that was already out there and public. It will have previously been on our website. So it was regarded as not yet a data breach, but the data protection team logged it and asked us to keep them up to date, so that if any further data suddenly became known to us that had been breached, then we would have to then go back to them and reflect and reconsider that. Working with One ITSS and also local police constabulary, who allocated officers to us to support us through the process. Pretty much everybody said to me, you need to contact Martin. You must contact Martin and his team at the NEBRC. And it's the best thing I ever did, because when this suddenly hits you, you don't know what to do. You know, you plan for it, or you think you plan for it, but then when it happens, you literally don't know what to do. So I contacted Martin, and I passed my stress over to him. But together then Martin and his team were able to then kind of, you know, guide us through what we needed to do. And from that point forward, we had that partnership and connectivity and you know, started on this timeline and journey together.
Thanks, Wendy. So next slide, please. So this is the sort of first point at which Wendy and I are speaking via video call. And it was a slightly unusual one for the NEBRC. So the Cyber Resilience Centres are not an incident response, and we'll come into more detail on that shortly. And there were some questions around, was this an ongoing incident or was it historical? Or, you know, it's kind of that fog of war at the minute. So because it wasn't deemed to be ongoing, we felt that we would get involved and actually help them and do what we call a vulnerability assessment. Now, all of the cyber resilience centres use students to deliver some cybersecurity work under certain conditions. And we felt that what we call a vulnerability assessment, so looking at the network for gaps, both from across the internet and internally, may help give a bit of a position on what the security is like. The pros and cons of this are, in this context, is if we find a gap when we do that work, then it's not to say that that's how that network manager's name has appeared on the dark web. Doesn't give us that information. The only real way to get to the bottom of that is an incident response, which is something that's typically provided through the private sector, or if you've got cyber insurance, it may well be as part of that policy, you can get an incident response. But I think the first thing we sort of suggested is, right, change all of the sort of admin passwords, you know, belt and braces, enforce a password reset, and let's start to do some work around a vulnerability assessment. And what was really good in this instance, it is a County Durham feature, but County Durham's Police Crime Commissioner, Joy Allen, agreed to pay half of this work. So not only is any work that Cyber Resilience Centres do incredibly affordable, because it's heavily subsidised, really, really effective. It was even more cost affordable in this case because Joy Allen agreed to fund 50% because, you know, she sees a lot of schools in her patch, so to speak, having cyber incidents, and she understands the potential impact, which you'll see through this case study. Next slide, please. So what did the students do? So they did an external scan, and we found that the VPN that the school was using, so the technology where staff can remote into the network, had a vulnerability on it that was quite old. And that vulnerability, there was intelligence to suggest that it was being actively exploited by ransomware groups. So at this point, David and I, Wendy's network manager, having conversations around the pros and cons of what do we do with the VPN. And to be really clear, I had to play this with a bit of a straight bat because it's not, I don't do David's job. It's not my position to say you should do this, David. But what we kind of had was a conversation around risk, which is, you know, we know that this is being exploited by ransomware groups, so it's quite likely that it can happen. And given that ransomware proliferating across the school network is quite high impact, so when you start scoring risk, it came up quite highly. And David decided to take the VPN offline, whilst, you know, to take it down to A, stop that weakness from being present, and B, to do what he needed to do to get that VPN secure. But of course, this has a knock-on effect. And, you know, on Thursday, the 21st, and over the weekend, it meant that staff couldn't remote in if they needed to do work. So, you know, there are pros and cons with any of these decisions. And as part of the config review that students were doing, so they were looking at some of the security settings, showed some sort of vulnerabilities in how their Active Directory was set up. Well, weaknesses, should we say, areas for improvement. On the right here are two of our students that did that work. So we had Jack and Cosmin, both Northumbria University students just about to graduate. They're already really experienced. They've done a lot of this work, and it's just a really good opportunity to give them some experience of doing work like this whilst helping the school, whilst putting my policing hat on. Hopefully these are crimes that don't happen. So that's what we try to, that ethos is what we try to create through the Cyber Resilience Centres. Next slide, please. But of course, all of that changed, and all of that changed on the 26th of September, when this email came in to the school. Now, some of this is redacted because this is a live ongoing investigation, but ultimately what you're seeing here is a demand. And it's a demand that comes with an attachment. So you can see there's a text file in the top right-hand corner of the screen. And ultimately, what this is saying is we are a hacking group. We have compromised your network and we have stolen a load of your data. And they want to push you onto a communication mechanism on the dark web using the Tor browser. And if you don't do any of this, we're going to release the information online, is what they're saying. So it's a typical extortion. You can see here, if you don't contact us by a certain date and start negotiating with us, typically this tends to be they'll demand payment in cryptocurrency. So yeah, and David, what he did was he looked into the text file and found that yeah, it did contain a lot of the school's sensitive information, and this was genuine. So next slide, please. Now, in my head, and I'll hand over to Wendy, I think, on the slide after this, but in my head, there are various things that are going through at the minute. One, I've never been this close to a cyber attack before. We've never had a student service kind of running at a time when something like this comes in. And you've got to think, like, are they still on the network or are they not? Is this genuine or not genuine? Well, obviously the text file gives it some credibility, but actually, how do you know? Because of the way that this happens, sometimes you get criminal group A will do the stealing, will compromise the network, and then they sell that information on to criminal group B. So which criminal group is it that sent the email? It was at or around this time. I think Wendy had a couple of. It was just coincidental, wasn't it, Wendy? You had a pupil whereby he'd an A-level pupil had come and said, I think I found a weakness in the Wi-Fi network. So we're like, God, could it be him? It turned out it wasn't. And then you're thinking, actually, has this been via the VPN or has it come in via a phishing email? And it's really, really stressful and it's really confusing when something like this happens. It is literally the fog of war. How's this happened? What's the impact? What do I need to do next? And ultimately, in terms of understanding what's happened and what the impact is, it really does come down to the logs. And I think in this instance, the bad guys had either deleted the logs or we'd only had the logs for 30 days. So we only had a tight window to do it. I've mentioned police cyber alarm here. I won't go into that into huge detail, but you can just Google police cyber alarm, and depending on how the network's set up with a fire alarm, policing offers a level of sort of proactivity, and police cyber alarm can sometimes keep logs for a little bit longer than the 30 days, but that wasn't here in this instance. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I had to do, and I guess I'll talk about the first green decision, was we had to stop our student service. We had to stop our vulnerability assessment, because I'm thinking, actually, you know, is what we're doing actually helping the bad guys jump around the network? We just don't know. So to be on the safe side, we closed the network down. And Wendy, I guess if I hand over to you at this point to talk about decisions that you made around the kids and what you did with the network and how you were feeling at this point.
Stressed, like you. Yes, I mean, what do you do? So we thought, yeah, we have to take the network down. And we did that at the end of the day just to give us a little bit of time, because you take the network down, you effectively have to close the school. But do you really know what is connected to your network? You know, what is reliant on your network? You take the network down and immediately we lose phones, we lose tills, we lose photocopier ability. You know, there's so much attached to your network that you just, until this kind of incident happens, you just don't think about that. And that really, I've said quite often when doing these sessions with Martin, we had a business continuity plan, but actually it rewrote itself from this very minute. You know, the time when we decided to take it down, we had to suddenly think, what does this really mean in reality? And it all came back to the safeguarding of children. And really, it was at that point you take it down and you think, right, we need registers, we need registers printing off. We need to be able to contact vulnerable students and families. So you're scrabbling around to get that information, getting out to the heads of year and the pastoral managers, who they can then contact people the following day. You've got pressure from senior management basically saying, you know, we need school back up and running very, very quickly, you know, no more than a day. And you're thinking no more than a day is highly unrealistic when this is so big. And, you know, we didn't appreciate how big this really was. So yeah, the business continuity plan wrote itself, and we took the VPN down. We decided straight away, and through Martin's advice as well, that we needed that more intrusive investigation into the network to find out what had gone on, where this had come from, what is the future threat. So all of this is going on at the same time, and we then had to really think about, right, who are we going to get in? And it was at that point where we also contacted the Department for Education's RPA insurance scheme to let them know, you know, this is still happening, and, you know, we need somebody to come in and to help us do this intrusive assessment. They unfortunately were unable to commit to being able to come in the following morning. They couldn't really give us a quick quotation as to what it was going to be. And through links with Martin, we found a very local company called Waterstones, who, because the phones were down, they couldn't ring school. But Martin will talk to you a bit about that and how he facilitated that for us.
Thanks. Next slide, please. So yeah, taking the network down is probably the right thing to do, because you don't know if the bad guys are still on there. But ultimately, it's things like, well, if all of the telephones are voice over IP, all those go down. And ultimately, as Wendy's alluded to, time is key, because for safeguarding reasons, you know, you may have looked after children. There may be children that really need to be in school. You don't want to have the school closed, which shut the network down and forces for very long. You want to do that as quickly as you can. So next slide, please. So this is kind of a bit like serendipity. I honestly didn't know this and couldn't write this. So my rationale at that point was, well, if the guys don't know who to speak to for an incident response, I know one that's literally next door to them, based in Durham, called Waterstones. So let's do that. So I picked up the phone and spoke to Stuart Hogg, who you can see on the bottom right-hand screen here. Waterstones are a partner of the NEBRC as well, which I think, you know, this is a testament to the network that we're trying to build between public, private, and academia. And said to Stu, you know, Durham Framwellgate School needs some help. Can you go in and have a conversation with about incident response? And they went in and did the incident response. But the gent on the top right-hand side of the screen, Akib, is an ex-student of ours. So what happens is, once students that work with us and do some security work graduate, they then go on into the world of work and are no longer an NEBRC student. Well, Akib had gone into the world of work and was worked at Waterstones and worked on this incident response, which I genuinely didn't know until afterwards. So again, what we're trying to achieve through the centre in terms of giving the next generation of cybersecurity professionals that experience so they can leverage that on the CV and interviews really works. And what Waterstones were able to do through some of the Microsoft logs was kind of give a root cause analysis and really get to understand how this has happened. Next slide, please. So effectively what they were able to see is it was the VPN that was the point of ingress in this attack. But look where the timeline is now. It's jumped from the right to the left. So they've been on the network since the 3rd of August last year, potentially. So before Wendy and I were even speaking, you know, this bad stuff was happening. And you can see that basically that the attacks against the vulnerable VPN start from a Russian IP address. They then get a foothold into the network, and basically footprinting means they don't know anything about the network. At this point, they probably don't even know that it's Durham Fram School. They just know that they've found a weakness. And that's one of the key points I'd like to make here. More often than not in cyber incidents of this sort of nature, it's vulnerabilities that are targeted, not the organisation. So it is not the school. The bad guys have not set out with a specific purpose to target Durham Framwellgate School. they've probably set out with a specific purpose to target the VPN, and whichever organization has that VPN, has that vulnerability, you're then in a lottery that you don't want to win. And you can see here that again, that then maybe they've sold the access on, or it depends if they're using other VPNs to hide their footprints. But you can see that all different IP addresses from different parts of the world are connecting into the VPN. And yeah, and basically there was some evidence to suggest that once they got in, they'd done some things like decrypting password hashes, etc. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over to Wendy, because at this point, you know, we talked about considerations around the ICO, and now lots of things have changed. So would you like to sort of allude as to what your thoughts were on that, please, Wendy?
Yeah, of course. So once we had the email that came in, and you know, we've got your data, we then, the network manager was able to go in and look at that file and see what the extent of the data was that they had. And there were 400 data subjects, and it was student medical information. Basically, it was a student medical register that they got their hands on. That included student prescriptions, the kinds of medication that they took, where and when, support in place, and also emergency contact information of the parents for that child. So with it being quite significant, obviously immediate contact with, again, Northumberland County Council data protection team, who said, yeah, this is a data breach, we need to inform the ICO, which they did. And then we needed to consider how we were going to handle this, because obviously there's a potential risk for reputational damage. We have to protect the students, we have to protect the families and all of the data subjects in these files. We did seriously consider, and it was a conversation Martin and I had at length, we have a conference facility at our school, and we considered basically just opening the doors to these data subjects, the families, the parents, inviting them in and presenting the information to them. So basically fronting it out, being very honest with them, and at the same time providing advice and support as to how they can protect themselves, things to look out for. We were very keen on going down that route. However, the deciding factor was the fact that this is, and to this day, is still a live police investigation. So we didn't want to muddy the waters and you know, muddy that investigation. That would be, you know, the wrong thing to do. So we basically then wrote to them, very honest and open letter, and said, this is what's happened. This is why we think it's happened. This is what it means to you. And this is the data that they've got in relation to your child. And it's what I've already explained. I expected a backlash from that, but I literally got 5 responses from parents. From those 400, I got 5 responses. And those 5 responses were, thank you for the information. Can you please just confirm there was no financial information in the data breach, which I was able to confirm. So the parents seemed far more concerned around financial information getting out there rather than medical information getting out there, possibly through naivety and not knowing what, you know, what could somebody do with that medical information. So, you know, there's a lesson learned there, and we were able to sort of direct parents as well to really good advice lines, some good web links as to how they can continue to protect themselves, and also medically wise, what that might mean to them and to their children. So yes, we sent that off to the ICO. ICO then came back to us asking for us to complete almost a questionnaire and to produce a report back to them about our response. So it's really important that you keep a chronology of every single event from the start to the finish. And that chronology allowed me to write a really lengthy, detailed report about who we contacted, what we've done, why, copied emails into it between, you know, the police, between myself and Martin, and also Northumberland County Council, and that was then sent off to the ICO. And thankfully they came back within a couple of weeks actually and said, no case to answer, basically, there's nothing else that you could have done, and we're logging the case, but for now we're closing the case.
Thanks, Wendy. That's a bit of good news there. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to race through the next couple of slides in the interests of time. Law enforcement investigation up to date, yeah, it's ongoing. It may well be that it's, you know, a lot of this comes from overseas. You sometimes reach jurisdictional dead ends. But I think in terms of some lessons learned, the next couple of slides just sort of tease some of that out, which I'll let you read now. But I think the big one for me is you know, the cost of proactivity is far less. than the cost of reactivity. So, you know, the student service that we did that would have identified or did identify the VPN vulnerability cost a fraction of the 15K. It really, really does. Next slide, please. And again, this is a bit of a brain dump of some things that, you know, some lessons learned, some things moving forward. For me, I think there's a reputational aspect in here around Ofsted and parents, and, you know, could parents end up moving their kids to different schools through something like this? Who knows? But there are all these sort of safeguarding issues, which I genuinely believe that this stuff, sometimes people thinks it's noughts and ones like binary. It's not. It has a real world impact. It really does. Very much like a punch in the nose on a Friday night can have. You know, the stress that Wendy went through, and then by proxy me through her. It's not something that I would choose to go through again. So it's really, really important that maybe the next slide, which is the sort of penultimate slide, some things to take away from this. Well, from my perspective, it's understanding your network a little bit more, maybe doing the vulnerability assessments. Some of the student services that we can do can help. It's having conversations with technology partners, whoever they may be, whether it be Acronis or somebody else, around things like this, and understanding if you need to break glass, what that looks like, because it's kind of not if, but when something like this is going to happen. You know, and consider things like the police cyber alarm, the NCSC's early warning service. Just Google them, they're completely free. Consider cyber essentials, because if you do it, not only would it help with the issues like the VPN, it also comes with a level of cyber cover. And I think Cyber Essentials Plus comes with, part of that cyber cover comes with a bit of incident response. So for me, one of the last things I would encourage you to do is visit our webpage and consider the free core membership. But proactivity beats reactivity. Start chatting to whoever it is your IT stakeholders are about things like this and having conversations. So that's kind of it from me, Ed. I don't know if you want to come in with the end with any closing thoughts.
I thought that was very, very useful, guys. Now, I mean, look, there's a lot of takeaways for the audience to digest there. It's, you know, this is one of those incidents you hope never happens. You wouldn't wish on anyone, and there's so many unknowns. I think that's the big one here. You can plan and you can plan, but you're still going to get caught out with things you maybe hadn't considered. You only know what you know, right? So the key is to engage with organizations like the NEBRC, engage with organizations like Acronis, your IT service providers, to make sure that you are doing these kind of continual assessments and just testing the plans that you have in place to make sure that you can get around these events, or at least make them less hair-raising when they occur. So Martin, Wendy, thank you very much again for your time today, and thanks to everyone for attending. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for the third episode, where we're going to be covering defensive tactics and meeting DFE and NCSC guidelines. Thank you very much.